Hey, Pearl, how are you?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to Access Granted Small Business Webinar Series. My name is Dr. Portia Jackson, and I am the Business Development Manager with the City of Houston's Office of Business Opportunity. Today we have a wonderful show for you. We are talking about how to navigate through employment challenges, legal updates, and also how to prepare your facilities and your workers to reopen again during COVID. We have guest panelists Arquella Hargrove, Anton Craney from Benson and Elkins, Arquella Hargrove, and last but not least, Ellen Joseph. So to give you some background about Access Granted, our webinar series, if you go to our website, which is houstontx.gov/OBO, you'll see a red bar there, and that is our COVID-19 Information Resource Hub. There you'll find a plethora of information for every topic regarding COVID. And because it's hard for us to go through this time, we wanted to make sure that we highlight some of those resources, because a lot of times it's so overwhelming to see the resources and you just want someone to tell you about it and then you can follow up and read later. So that's how we started Access Granted. This is our third installment. Our other two installments are available on our social media page, which I'll share a little bit later. But if you missed those, we definitely want to invite you to go and check that out. It's a lot of information given, and we know that you can benefit from that. I want to go over some housekeeping notes before we get started. Please, everyone, if you can have your lines on mute until it's your time to speak. Also, we'll have a Q&A two ways. Either you can type in the chat feature and we'll answer your question there, or we'll announce it during our live Q&A, or you can wait till we have Q&A at the end and we can address your questions at that time. And then you'll be able to unmute your line. Also, this webinar is being recorded, and we're also broadcasting on Facebook Live. So to everybody on Facebook Live, hello, and we thank you. And you too can also type in your questions on our timeline, and we'll be happy to answer those as well. So I want to get started with our first guest. Let me pull up her slide here. Our first guest is Arquella Hargrove. Arquella, I like to refer to her as an HR guru. She is a highly sought after facilitator, leadership consultant, speaker, and coach dedicated to transformative and sustainable results of people throughout development. And she is going to talk to us today about best practices in HR. Arquella, how are you doing?
Good, Portia. How are you?
Doing pretty well.
Good, good.
It is your floor. So like I said and announced to everybody, you're an HR guru and your company is Epic Collaborative Advisors. And you're going to talk to us today. I have your PowerPoint slides, so whenever you're ready to go, just let me know.
Great, thank you, thank you. And thank you for having me. I'm excited to join the panel and to share some best practices as it relates to how do we return employees back into the workplace during and after COVID, the COVID-19 pandemic. And that's something that's not as simple as we think when we think about normal return to work. And so I really want to share some at high level things to think about and tips. And afterwards, I'm definitely will have the checklist for anyone who's interested that will break down each one of the steps in more detail. And so if you can go to the next slide, Portia, then I can get into the different steps and things to consider when we are returning our employees back into the workplace. So the first area we want to think about would be workplace safety. And so we want to make sure that as business owners, employers, that we want to ensure that our workplaces are as safe as they can be. That is not only for our employees, but also for our customers, because some folks are thinking that, again, we want to make sure that it's safe and no one's fearful of returning because they don't know what to expect. And so here's some things that we want you to consider around workplace safety. One is, will you implement any type of employee health screening procedure? So for example, I have a client group that will do temperature screenings for each of their employees every morning. Have another group that will implement a questionnaire where employees would have to complete at their own, just to say if they have it or not, if they have any temperature, if they have different temperature levels. So those are things to think about. The other is thinking about the personal protective equipment. So it's, are you supplying masks and gloves and face shields to your employees? Any sanitizers? Those are things to consider. And how is the workplace going to be set up? So I have a client that they made sure that they sanitized their entire offices before any of the employees returned, as well as they provided the different personal protective equipment. Something else to consider when we think about safety is the physical distancing measures. So if you have so many employees who are returning to work, how are we going to practice social distancing? And so that may be that if you have cubicle setups, is it one person per cube? Are we staggering different breaks such as lunch breaks? Are we rotating employees in throughout the week, throughout every other day? So just thinking about what does that look like? What does that feel like to ensure, again, we're practicing safety and that people still know that there's some distance between themselves and their coworkers. Another thing to think about around safety would be travel. Is essential travel, how do we define that? Who is going to be allowed to travel or not? And we have to look at our policies and procedures to determine if there's anything that needs to be updated as it relates to that essential travel, and following any government guidelines or restrictions as well. So when we think about safety, those are things that we're thinking about. And finally, making sure that we're in line with OSHA standards and the CDC standards. And that is making sure those signs are posted as well throughout your offices. The second area I wanted to just really highlight was the recall procedures. There are some employers and businesses that are planning how and when employees will return to work or to the work site to create an organized and controlled approach. So phasing in. So I have client groups that will do the return in phases. So phase one is going to happen on a certain date. It's only going to be 20% of the workforce. For phase two will be another 20%. But just thinking about what's the recall procedures and all of that, you want to make sure that you're communicating effectively and completely with employees so they know exactly what the process is going to be and how to follow. So that's another area to think about when we are looking at returning back to the workplace. A third area will be employee benefits. So think about your group health insurance, eligibility. So do we need to redetermine any waiting period issues due to leave or reinstatement, as well as reviewing any eligibility requirements during a layoff or a furlough? Those are things we want to take a look at around benefits. Also, vacation. Are we continuing to accrue vacation or paid time off during the time that we've been quarantined, or stay home work orders? So those are things that we have to take a look at in those benefits to determine if there's going to be any adjustments. We want to go back to our original policies and procedures and make any modifications and ensure that that's communicated to your employees. Another benefit area to think about is 401k and any other type of pension programs. Again, reviewing eligibility issues if you had layoffs or furloughs, and if there's any break in service issues or counting years of services concerns. Again, just things to think about as we are looking to go back into the workplace, what do we need to modify in order to make sure we're making people whole as possible? Another area that we are looking at when we think about return to work and COVID, what's come up with COVID is compensation. I know some folks may have had employers or businesses may have had to make the decision to cut salaries because there was the reduction in hours, or it impacted financially the business because of COVID and everything that's happening. So looking at compensation and how is that going to impact employees, especially if you have exempt level employees, and is that going to cause any issues with their classifications? So those are things too that we look at in regards to during and after COVID-19. Another area that we look at is remote working. I have heard many groups go, oh my gosh, we really have been doing very well working remotely. We're going to continue it. And so it is having those telecommuting programs and policies in place that will cover any equipment usage. It will cover the process of who's going to be working remotely for how long, and if we're ensuring safety measures. If people are working from home, we want to make sure we have those checklists and things in place to ensure that we are covering everything as it relates to that home office, as well as what we're providing to employees as remote workers. So that's something to consider that is going very well for some organizations. And do we continue that? Now, what I have advised clients that if you have anyone who have underlying health issues, or if they may have issues with childcare, I'm finding that we're able to allow those employees to continue doing remote work, especially if the business is able to allow that. So just looking at those special situations and considering that for long term. Another area to consider when we think about during and post COVID-19 is communication. I cannot stress that enough, is communicate, 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 and really establishing a clear communication plan, which will allow employees and your customers to understand how the business plans to reopen or reestablish any business processes. And that if we're keeping employees updated along the process, again, they have a better understanding and they are able to know exactly what's going to happen or what's to come. And then a couple other final things I wanted just to share was around policy changes. If we've had telecommuting, we've talked benefits, we've talked workplace safety. Those are things that we take a look at, our current policies, to determine if there's anything that we need to change. Now, we know that there was regulations that were implemented around the extension of FMLA. Those are things that we want to make sure that our policies reflect those changes. Other things, paid leave policies, attendance policies, sometimes we may relax those to encourage employees who may be sick to stay home. The flexible scheduling options may be another policy that we consider. Any meal or rest break policies. So those are exempt travel policies. So I would encourage you to take a look at any policies and procedures that you have in place to determine if there's any type of modifications that are needed. And then the last one is business continuity plans. Employers, businesses will definitely, from this experience, will want to make sure you have some type of business continuity plan in place in case we have to look at doing something similar in the fall. As they said, that it may be worse in the fall. And so we want to make sure that we have something that's in place to know what needs to happen during an emergency. How do we stay in contact with our employees? How do we make sure our plan resources and contact information is accurate? And then possibly establishing a pandemic task force to continuously monitor, external and internal data around protocols that are coming up. And so that is something really to think about, along with your current if you have a current business continuity plan. So of course we're here in Houston. So I think about disastrous planning. So when we think about tropical storms or hurricanes, those are things that we should have plans for. Now we add a pandemic and what may happen. So those are things that I recommend and have worked with clients to implement as well. And Portia, I think I have one more slide with just some final comments and recommendations. So I shared just client best practices, talked about communication. I say over communicate and just making sure everyone knows what's going to be happening. We talked about the reopening and phases. Again, that's part of that communication, remote work. So a couple of things that has really worked with clients that really has been helpful is doing the employee COVID-19 acknowledgement forms, really outlining here's what the business is going to do. Here's the procedures that we have in place. We're following CDC guidelines. We are ensuring that we're aligned with what the state is recommending, and having employees to sign off that they adhere to that, as well as if they feel that they're sick, they may have symptoms, that they're going to go get tested. So all of that we have incorporated into acknowledgement form for employees to sign off on. And that is something that really just will help with a layer of protection for the business as well as for the employee, and putting a procedure in place if you do have an employee who tests positive for COVID. There are steps that you can take to make sure that the employee they go get tested. They make sure that they are quarantining themselves. Once they are released to come back to work, we have notification from their medical provider. And then also, how do we communicate that to other employees, especially who were in close contact with that employee? How do we communicate that? So all of those things should be a part of your communication plan, as well as things that you're rolling out to your employees, so they know exactly what processes and systems are in place during this time. And as I said, if anyone who wants it's a COVID-19 back to work checklist. It has the details for each one of those areas that I've highlighted, that gives additional steps that you can take for your business, and to make sure that, again, that you are protecting yourself as well as your employees. And thank you, Portia, for this opportunity. Again, Arquella Hargrove with Epic Collaborative Advisors, and happy to be a resource going forward. You're on mute, Portia.
I was following my own directions. But thank you. You covered it pretty much from A to Z as far as what people need to do as far as getting ready to be prepared, the policies and procedures, and how to get everyone ready. What I really like too is that you pointed out that it's not just about being prepared and reopened for COVID, but it's a disaster. So we know here in Houston, we always have, I don't want to say always, but hurricanes, we're familiar with them. And there could be other things that may happen that we don't know. And so for uncertain times, we can, as business owners, develop this plan that will take us through each of the uncertain times. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
And just one last question. So from advising, and I know you've done several talks around this for other events and other organizations, what have you found to be the major concern or the most apprehension that business owners have had in preparing to reopen?
A couple of things. That's a great question. A couple of things is, one is just really ensuring that they have everything in place to bring employees back into the workplace. So just the setup of their offices, as well as who to bring back first in that phasing process. If they know they have employees who have these underlying health concerns, or employees who may have childcare issues, just wanting to make sure that they're doing the right thing. And so that's been really top of mind, just to make sure they're treating everyone fairly. But it's been, how do we make sure we're ready for people to come back into the workplace, and then who are we going to bring back in which phase, and making sure, again, that they're listening and taking care of everyone who may have a concern or issue.
Awesome. Again, thank you for your time, and hopefully you can stick around should there be
Yeah,
questions at the end. Okay,
yeah,
great.
thank
Well, next, I would like to introduce Anton Craney. Anton, don't speak yet because I have a slide for you, and I want to give you your just due cost. Anton Craney works for Vincent and Elkins, and his principal areas of responsibility or areas of practice are upstream and midstream oil and gas transactions, clean energy transactions, project development, mergers and acquisitions. He has studied at the Washington University School of Law, and he has a certificate in business law, and he has a wealth of information he's ready to share, updates and resources available for you. So Anton, welcome.
Thank you so much. And I hope I can live up to that lovely introduction.
I'm sure you will.
So a lot of my work, especially recently, has been with the CARES Act and that specific part of recent employment law. As we know, unemployment has risen drastically in the past couple of months. And that's largely a result of these severe economic conditions. And so a lot of companies have been trying to take measures to be able to weather the storm, I guess, for lack of a better saying. And that's included, as Arkella was saying, it's included salary cuts, it's included layoffs. But one of the things that I've run into with my research is, a lot of these companies that are pursuing these measures out of necessity, really, they end up losing out in the long term because then they pursue financing options through assistance programs such as the CARES Act that basically, I don't want to say penalize, but that result in what could be a grant becoming a loan. And I'll delve into that a little bit further. So the CARES Act was passed. It's a $2 trillion program. And one of the major aspects for small businesses is the Paycheck Protection Program. And what that does is it's structured as a loan, and the amount is capped at 10 million, but it's based on a formula that's derived from average monthly payroll for the 1-year period preceding the distribution of the loan. And the CARES Act actually, so this loan is technically a Section 7A Small Business Act loan. So that's been existing, but the CARES Act expands the eligibility for companies to get this loan. So for instance, one entity that wasn't able to get this loan before, public nonprofits. So private nonprofits had access to Section 7A loans. Public ones didn't. Under this, they do. And I think the exact language is any business concern with under 500 employees per location. I'm paraphrasing. But this loan program is available specifically for payroll expenses as well as certain other outlined purposes. But the primary goal, I guess the legislative intent behind this was to allow employers to be able to go through this tough economic crisis and retain their employees and kind of alleviate that economic distress. So, as I was saying earlier, there's part of the Paycheck Protection Program that a lot of businesses, when they're trying to stay afloat and they're making all these cuts because they're trying to make sure that they can just stay, I guess, stay alive basically in these conditions, they're actually hurting themselves. And so the loan forgiveness portion of the CARES Act requires that you can have your entire principal of your loan be forgiven so long as 60%, and this was actually recently changed. When it initially came out, it was 75%, but June 5th, actually, they altered the CARES Act and stated that 60% of the proceeds had to go to payroll expenses. So in order to be able to have your loan forgiven that you're given under this program, you have to be expending at least 60% of that on payroll expenses. Now, that doesn't exactly mean you'll still get the entirety of that loan forgiven. And what I mean by that is there are two main reductions that they can, kind of a roundabout phrasing, but reductions for your loan forgiveness. So basically what it would result in is an increased amount that you'd have to pay back. And the first would be a reduction in employee headcount, so full-time employee headcount. And the other is a reduction in employee salary. But there's a few minor exclusions and stipulations around these, and that's kind of what I would personally like to get into a little bit more, just so employers are aware of this, because I think it's really important that employers kind of know exactly what they can and can't do under these programs. And so beginning with employee full-time headcount, the calculation is for the year before, and there's a separate calculation for seasonal employers. So that's something, if any seasonal employers are listening to this, that's something to definitely go and look into, because there's a separate way of calculating for that. But in general, it's based on the year prior. And so if you reduce during the period, the covered period, during the period where you have the loan, if you reduce your full-time employee headcount, your loan, or the amount of loan forgiveness, also gets reduced. But if, and this recently actually was added, again, June 5th, and I want to emphasize later that anyone who's interested in this or trying to participate in this program, constantly stay on watch, because these things are changing every day. I mean, I did so much research prior to June 5th, and then all of a sudden they revamped a lot of it. So you have to go back and really make sure that you know what's current. But anyways, they recently added that you can, if you eliminate that reduction, so if you rehire someone that you fired during that period, or you release during that period, then that headcount reduction is eliminated and you go back to receiving your full loan forgiveness. But it's actually been expanded even further. So that was initially the rule, but recently they said that if you give a good faith offer to that employee to come back, and you prove that it's in good faith and everything, and they decide not to come back, then that employee headcount won't, the reduction actually won't harm you. So that's something that companies need to keep in mind, because, you know, especially when this first happened, everyone was so worried and everyone just was taking all these drastic measures, because I mean, it is terrifying. People's livelihood is at risk, and you know, these businesses that they put everything into. So you're making cuts, you're trying to make sure that you can make it through this. And so you release a couple employees, unfortunately, and then all of a sudden you see this option and you're like, wonderful, this is going to be great. And then you realize, wait a second, I kind of shot myself in the foot. So this is wonderful. This Flexibility Act that was passed on June 5th, it kind of allows those employers to really reach out and do their best to eliminate that reduction. And if they can't, because of circumstances that are basically out of their control, then they don't get penalized for that. So that's something to definitely keep in mind for anyone who's considering using the Paycheck Protection Program. Let me know if I'm rambling or going over time, please, because I can keep, there's so much here. And then the other main reduction is for payroll. Now it's important to note that that's limited. If an employer reduces the salary of someone who is earning over $100,000, that actually will not result in a reduction in loan forgiveness. So you have a little bit of leeway there as an employer. And however, anything under that, you begin to suffer reductions for that. And there's the same exception kind of where you can, you know, fix the reduction and then your loan forgiveness comes back. But these types of things I think are exceptionally important, because there's such minute details that employers really, when you're so worried about your business, you might not pick up on. So I think these are really important. One of the other things to keep in mind as a business owner, if you're pursuing the Paycheck Protection Program or any other assistance program. So just as an aside, there's other programs such as the Economic Injury Disaster Loan, which has a $10,000 cash advance, emergency cash advance while the application is pending. So some companies that are really, really tight on cash and like needed immediately have chosen that option. And then there's bridge loans. So there's other options to go to. And one of the important resources to access for these options is the Small Business Administration. There's a branch here in Houston. If you look it up on Google Maps or anything, it's fairly accessible. You can actually get a real person on the phone, which is a rarity sometimes. But they are very helpful. And another great aspect is that of this law is that there's a lot of attention. And as a result, there's a lot of regulations, publications by the federal government. There's been FAQs published as part of the regulations almost every single time. If you look at the application itself for the Paycheck Protection Program, there's a ton of guidance just throughout in small print. So there's a lot of resources for this, but it's really important to pay attention to these minute details. Yeah, and I think my overall points, as I think I've harped on them enough, is, but the main one really is to calculate the appropriate measures to take. And I know I'm speaking almost more on the financing aspect than I am on employment itself, but I do think that the two are fairly intertwined in our current economic landscape. And I think that as a small business owner, you really need to calculate long-term, determine if you're going to pursue these loan options, you really have to be prepared, and you have to really figure out if it's worth cutting employees, because obviously there's a psychological factors of cutting employees, right? And if you can avoid doing that without harming your bottom line, then, you know, it's probably in your interest to not pursue those kind of more drastic measures and to get this financing, particularly when these companies end up getting financing anyways. So I think that's a very, very important thing in this time period, is just so calculating the appropriate measures to take. And then the other thing I said before, is staying informed is invaluable. There's so many changes being made to this type of law. There's so much every day that's being published on it. There's clarifications. Inevitably, there's some ambiguity in the application that gets found out and discovered, and people bring it up, and then the federal government publishes some report on it. Yeah, so thank you so much for listening to me ramble for a couple minutes.
Thank you for sharing the information, and I like that you pointed out that, I guess we could use the term fluid. The information is fluid. As far as I know, we've gotten calls here at OBO, and they're like, well, one day they said this, and the other day they said this. And so there was questions as far as, were they hearing the wrong thing? So I'm glad you pointed out that information is changing as we find out more information, and I'm sure as the SBA finds out information, but to encourage small business owners to stay abreast of that and know that we're all working to make sure that they have the resources that they need, and there are resources that can help them, FAQs you mentioned, to help guide them through the process. So what you basically just told us is you are an expert in the EIDL and the PPP and the CARES Act. So any questions, we can refer them to you, correct? Yes?
Sure thing. Expert. I don't know if anyone's an expert on it yet, so I'll take that title for now.
Okay, cool. Well, thank you so much for sharing. And we are going to move to our next guest, Dr. Stephen Barth. And I think it's safe to say we have a collection of gurus here on this webinar. Dr. Stephen Barth is the founder of HospitalityLawyer.com, RestaurantLawyer.com, MeetingLawyer.com, PrivateClubLawyer.com, and the annual Hospitality Law Conference Series. He's an author. He has more than 20 years of experience on hospitality operations, and he is here to talk to us today and share information about hospitality law, especially for those industries when you talk about restaurants, travel, which every business for the most part will have a piece of that, and hotels. So everybody, let's welcome Dr. Stephen Barth.
Thank you very much, Portia. It's a pleasure to be here, and I've learned a lot already, so thank you very much for including me. Before I get into the law, ladies and gentlemen, I want to take just a few minutes. I've also been involved in leadership for the last 30 years. And so Ms. Hargrove really set this portion of my talk up, and I'll reference some specific things that she talked about in just a moment. But I've learned over 30 years of interacting with leaders and researching leadership, there's really two types of leaders these days. There's an egocentric leader who it's all about themselves and the decisions they make, how they impact themselves, or there's the leader that puts the organization first. And I think it's really important that everybody take a moment and decide what kind of leader you are today and what kind of leader you want to be. I can tell you that the latter, the people that put the organizations first, they typically create a long-standing success legacy for not just themselves, but for the employees and their successors. I can tell you that people that are the egocentric type of leaders, the people that filter everything through their own personal lens, they typically come in like a hurricane, and they make a big blow in the beginning, and then they kind of leave chaos in their wake. So I'm hopeful you'll consider that when you're deciding what type of leader you'd like to be. Leaders that put the organization first typically look at things through an authentic lens, an empathic lens. They're transparent and they communicate a lot. And that's one of the things Ms. Hargrove mentioned that I want to emphasize. I am totally in agreement with her that please over communicate today, particularly today. It's more important than ever. Your people, they want to know what their circumstances are. So you must be transparent about your financial circumstances and just be truthful and accurate when you're sharing the information with them. Leaders show that they care about their people. It's a great time to find your voice. This is the most important time to show appreciation to your people. If you want to learn more about this, spend some time learning about emotional intelligence, and that will help guide you in how to manage and communicate perhaps differently with your employees than you have to date. And also a very good way to understand empathy and looking at things through your employees' perspective. Your employees are trying to cope, as everybody is today. So one of the things you can do just generally, not just for your employees, but people in general, is to do kind things for other people. If you do that, that will also help you cope with some of the emotional turmoil that's going on. So, one of the best ways to generate self-esteem, confidence, and joy, which a lot of people may be lacking today, is to do those kind things for people. There's a website called Random Acts of Kindness if you need a boost. So I just thought I'd start out with that concept because of what we're going through. Leadership is absolutely crucial today, and I hope you'll reflect on some of those thoughts. Okay, let's talk legal, because Portia's going, hey, let's get to the legal. So here we go. So first, ladies and gentlemen, as you know, in Texas, we've got these phases of openings, and they're 25%, 50%, 75% of capacity, et cetera. But I want you to keep in mind that your decision on how much to open should not be based on politics or government decrees, other than a maximum level, but your level should be based upon your capacity. Keep in mind that 6 feet of social distancing is the absolute minimum the social distancing should be. That's inside. If it's outside, 6 feet is certainly a minimum, because the wind can blow the virus much greater lengths. So I've seen reports that it's up to 30 feet in some instances. So you need to be mindful of that when you're opening your doors. Now, keep in mind that just because the government says you can open, that doesn't mean you can do whatever you want to do. Again, it should be driven by your capacity. How many tables can you fit with appropriate social distancing? What about your walkways? What about your patio tables? Some restaurants have taken in their parking lots so they can have broader space between their tables, which is a good idea. I get asked all the time, can I insist that my employees wear masks? The answer is yes, and or face coverings. And I encourage you to do so. We've found, and most of the health experts, I think all of the objective health experts agree, that wearing masks or face coverings is one of the best ways to reduce the transmission of the virus. So I think we should do our part. Then people say, what about our customers? Can we insist that people wear masks when they come into our business? And the answer is yes. Just like any other house rule you can establish at your business, you have the ability to provide and establish guidelines to assist you in operating your business and to have people comply with in order to take advantage of your business. Now, they must be legal, right? But wearing a mask or a face covering in order to enter is legal. Now, of course, in a restaurant, it makes it challenging because people will want to take their mask off in order to eat. But when they get up to go to the restroom or if they walk up to the bar, it's absolutely okay to insist that they wear their masks. Now, there is one caveat to this, and that's known as the Americans with Disabilities Act. That's an exception to the mask. If somebody comes to you and says, because of this underlying condition I have, I cannot wear a mask, well then, whether it's an employee or a guest, you need to try to have an interactive process of figuring out a reasonable accommodation for either the employee or the guest. But as with most things in the law, there are exceptions to the exceptions. So if somebody does come to you and say, hey, I cannot wear this mask because of this, but you feel like the accommodation is only to let them on the floor of your restaurant or behind the desk of your hotel and they're going to be interacting directly with guests without a mask, you do not have to make that accommodation, because your responsibility goes not just toward that person, but to all of your employees and all of your guests to create a safe environment for everybody. So the ADA can be a sticky wicket, but keep in mind, if the accommodation is going to create financial hardship or some sort of unhealthy environment or danger to your other employees or guests, you do not have to make that accommodation. So keep that in mind. And it might do you well if that happens to seek legal guidance, because it can be challenging to come up with an effective resolution of that. Now, the other thing I want to remind you of is if you do open, you are not the insurers of your guest safety, whether it's a restaurant or a hotel, but you do have an obligation to operate your hotel or your restaurant with reasonable care. Now, fortunately for everybody on this call or on Facebook, you have the benefit of Ms. Hargrove and her workplace safety recommendations, and she's offered to share even deeper detail with you. And if it were me, as a matter of fact, I'm going to ask for that list as soon as we disconnect, because that's one of the best lists. And first of all, her opening checklist was fantastic, but her workplace safety checklist, if you comply with those suggestions and you hold your employees accountable to those things, as well as your customers like we talked about, then I feel confident you're going to deliver and operate your business with reasonable care. And that's something you need to strive diligently to achieve today. Now, let me tell you why it's so important, even more important today than it was before the virus outbreak. Before the virus outbreak, you probably had some liability insurance potentially for a claim that somebody got the virus at your hotel or restaurant. But today, if you've renewed your insurance policy in the last 60 or 90 days, you probably don't have coverage for any type of coronavirus transmission. And so you will be on your own, not even getting coverage for your attorney's fees. So I think that's another huge incentive for you to operate with reasonable care. Follow those guidelines and suggestions that Ms. Hargrove set out for you. Follow up with her checklist that's more detailed. Follow the CDC guidelines. Follow the healthcare providers' guidelines, and you will be in good stead. One item that we haven't heard much about is, I would suggest that nobody in the hotel or restaurant business allow people to smoke or vape on their property anywhere, patios, exterior, anywhere. We do not know yet how this virus is transmitted. It could very well be in exhaled smoke or vape, and I would encourage you to think about making that part of your policy. One final thought around this is that meetings are of any size at all are pretty well banned, and I would encourage you to comply with that. I'm finding that most large programs are being canceled throughout 2020, and those of us in the meeting space do not expect face-to-face meetings to come back until perhaps the end of the first quarter or early in the second quarter of 2021. Finally, for another resource specifically related to hotels and restaurants, at hospitalitylawyer.com, we have a blog, and we've opened it to the public during this time, and you'll find an entire library curated, devoted to hotels and restaurants that are dealing with COVID-19 challenges. Last but not least, one of the best things you can do right now is take care of yourself personally, take care of your own wellness and your immune system, and we'll all get through this together. Please wash your hands often. Thank you, Portia.
Thank you, Dr. Barth. You shared a lot of information and gave tips on what small business owners can do and to prepare and the legalities of it all. So definitely thank you so much. And what I really like too that you pointed out is for businesses to really consider your own capacity of when to reopen, because there are some businesses, they hear the information, they think this is my time, I got to get things, they're in a rush to get these things done, but you want to step back and look and see and make sure that you are set and you have the capacity to do it for the safety of yourself, your employees, and definitely your customers. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Our last guest is Ellen Joseph. Ellen is the pro bono counsel at Vincent & Elkins, and she manages all of the pro bono initiatives. And she is actually working with our office on a program, and I'm going to turn it over to Ellen to give you some background about our free legal services and how that came about. Ellen, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Can you hear me?
Yes, sound great.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for having me. I am thrilled to be on this esteemed panel talking about the issues that are changing every day, and that is for sure. So for a little background on me, I am the pro bono counsel at Vincent & Elkins, which means that I manage and direct the firm's pro bono program. And one of the things that's super important about my job is to be out in the community looking to see where there are gaps in service, where people might not have access to lawyers. And several years ago, small businesses became a new sort of a new pathway for pro bono. It used to be in the pro bono world, it was either for individuals or for nonprofits. If you were for profit, that took you out of the pro bono space, which just means that lawyers couldn't help you for free through any of these programs. But what we learned was that small businesses, especially in under-resourced communities, had just as little access to lawyers that individuals in poverty did. And their success meant the success for so many in their community. So the pro bono community as a whole expanded to include small businesses. And so one of the things that we've been doing over the last few years is partnering with the city of Houston, with the OBO, to offer services for small businesses. So we've done a few small business legal academies where we had experts talking about liability and insurance and employment issues and IP issues. And then we've for several years done virtual and telephonic consultations with our corporate lawyers for small businesses that participate in the city's program. So when the COVID crisis hit, it became clear that the small business community was going to take a huge hit. And I feel that it's part of my job to always be paying attention to what communities are going to be taking the hit. So whatever marginalized communities get hit by something, we try and be nimble and organize so that we can help. So whether it's a storm or a bad law that comes down, or a new policy, this was one of those things we knew small businesses were going to be hit. And so we wanted to organize. So I reached out to the city and figured out that we could really expand the services that we could provide by creating this telephonic consultation program, the Houston Small Business Legal Consultation Program. And we have nearly 20 law firms who are participating. And we have helped over 20 businesses now who have entered their information into the system, requested a telephonic consultation, and lawyers from our law firm and other area law firms have answered the call. So we are excited. We want as many small businesses who have been impacted to use this service. We have lawyers like Anton and many others who are studied up and ready to help. And so I'm here today to really encourage people, small businesses, if you have legal questions, if you have issues you don't know how to handle related to the COVID crisis, please utilize this service.
Great. Thank you, Ellen, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
And I just wanted to point out, as everyone can see, Ellen has a significant amount of passion for equal access for all businesses and justice. And you can tell by how she was describing the program and everything you do. So I do appreciate your passion and all the work that you're doing. It's a great partnership, and it's good to have you, and so people can connect with you and see your face and know that there is an advocate available for them with this free legal services, and that you are behind the scenes fighting, because I know it's probably not easy to pull all these people together. As they say, it's like herding cats, but you're pulling all these people together to fight to make sure that small businesses have the resources that they need and access to legal advice, because we know legal advice is crucial. It's almost priceless, especially in a time like this, because of all of the workplace safety, bringing people back, who's sick, who's not sick, using the right language, all that comes into play. So thank you so much.
And I just wanted to add that what has been really wonderful in this time is we have had lots of our lawyers reaching out, volunteering these. When I send out an intake from a small business, it gets picked up in 20 seconds. There are lawyers in the private sector are really anxious to help. And it's been incredibly gratifying for someone who's been in the public interest world for 20 years. It's not always easy to, get matters placed and get projects staffed, but it has been no problem getting lawyers to understand that these small businesses are the heart and soul of our city and our community, and they need us, and they haven't really. And we want to make sure that the businesses who really need us get to us. So, we're trying to pay as much attention as we can to female and minority owned businesses where we're seeing that they are not maybe getting served in the same rate. And so we are keeping an eye on that. We want to make sure everyone, access to justice is our goal, access to lawyers, access to programs. And so we want to make sure that what we're offering creates as much fairness and access as we can.
Excellent. Can you also give our audience just some issues that the lawyers are able to help with? I know it's financial assistance. Can you elaborate on the various?
Sure. So the things we're offering, assistance on any of the COVID-related grants or loan programs, assistance with lease issues, assistance with, we've had some IP issues, people who have created new things maybe during this time, or businesses that have split apart, incorporation issues. Open, closing down a business also sometimes has some legal issues, tax liability. So we really, what's so wonderful about marshaling the resources of private law firms is that this is the work. Advising business owners is actually what they do all day. So this is not a huge pivot for them to be able to read up on Anton's FAQs that he created for us and pivot to just smaller business owners that they can help. Sometimes it's a hard pivot to get a transactional, mergers and acquisitions lawyer to take on an asylum case for a, LGBT kid who came and is detained and involves language barriers and cultural barriers. But it's not a big pivot for people to really do what they do every day, but now do it for, people who could really, who really need it.
Awesome, thank you. So if you are interested in the free legal services, which I know you are, and definitely make sure you spread the word. With a resource like this, 20 is not enough. It should be in the hundreds doing this. So make sure you email OBO legal services at houstontx.gov and we can get you set up that way. So right now I'm going to take the time to open it up for questions. Pearl, I know you got my back. Are there any questions that have come into the chat feature? You're on mute. You're still on mute. We can hear you now. Well, we could. Hold on.
I'm actually on a mobile device today, so excuse the technical difficulty. But if anyone wants to ask any questions outside of the chat, you're also more than welcome to just unmute yourselves.
I have a quick question, if I may, for Anton. Anton, great presentation on the PPP and the CARES Act, but it's my understanding there's still money available for people to apply until June 30. Does that sound right to you?
Yeah, that's exactly right. There's still money available. I'm sure everyone's heard about all the commotion regarding the major corporations that applied and ended up getting funding and then sent it back, and some of them returned the money and everything. So there's still finances available. I would definitely recommend getting an application in as soon as possible to any interested businesses, because as we all know, money is finite.
Money is finite and cash is king right now, for
That's
sure.
right, yeah.
And so if I'm a restaurant or a hotel or any other business for that matter, I need a relationship with a bank in order to make that application. Is that accurate, or are there other ways to go about it?
So you don't need an existing relationship with a bank. So that some of the other programs like the SBA bridge loans, you already need to have an existing relationship. Okay. But you do need to, you go and you can look up, it's pretty easy actually, this information is pretty readily available, to find Houston SBA lenders, just banks that are, I think it's the exact terminology, but essentially they've been given authority to issue these SBA loans. And you can find the top 10 by, like, there's a list, I had a chart somewhere that I found just by searching on Google. And you can find this list, and through that, you just reach out to the bank, tell them you're trying to apply for this SBA loan, and get in touch with them that way. But yeah, I appreciate you bringing that up, because the logistics of it are definitely a little bit complex at times. So
yeah. And I heard some people were successful via PayPal. So that might still be a possibility for some.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't heard anything about that, but I'm assuming so many banks have had to change their systems as well during this, because you can't like go in. You're right. Like I think for everyone, if you really want to get something done in this kind of situation, you go in, right? You walk into the bank, you sit down, you talk to the person who's in charge of the lending, but that's not really an option, right? So
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, that's kind of the difficulty, right? It is, I think personally, one of the best ways to get a relationship, because it does help to have an established relationship, just so that you can go about, you know, calling a branch and then going with one person. Well, they're not in charge of the lending for under this program, so then you get sent to another person. I think it would be prudent for someone looking to a potential borrower to go and find, either through like LinkedIn or something, to do a little bit of background research and reach out to an individual, or through word of mouth to someone who's gotten these loans before, and actually talk to the individual who's responsible at these banks, right? Who gives out these loans, so that you can get an actual person to speak with, because that's really how all this stuff's going to get done. And like I said, it's finite resources, and as a lot of people are procrastinators, so 12 days left before June 30th.
Yeah.
I think there's going to be a lot of people filing for these.
Yeah. Good stuff.
Awesome. So again, thank you to all of our guests, panelists, and the information that you have shared. I know that it would be helpful to all of our small business owners that were present on the call and on Facebook Live. As we bring this webinar to a close, just want to remind you that our next webinar is July 9th. Same time, 2 p.m. You can register right now at tinyurl.com/accessgranted with the number 4. And as I promised earlier, you can see there on the screen our social media accounts. And so you will find this webinar, the recording of this webinar, as well as the previous ones that we've done on our social media pages, in particular our YouTube page. If you have any additional questions, or please feel free to reach out to me. And also visit our website at houstontx.gov/OBO. Until then, stay safe, and we hope that you all are well, and we will see you again on July 9th. And thank you again to our panelists. Thank you so much. Have a good day, everyone.
Thank you, Portia.
Thank you so much. It was wonderful.
Thank you,
Thank
Portia.
you.
Take care.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.